Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sauga Arts Hub, and this is the debut episode of our new podcast interviewing emerging artists from around the city. I'm your host, India Brown, and with me as our first very apropos first guest is Lisa Shen. It's great to have you, Lisa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Could you give our audience a quick rundown of who you are and what you do in the Mississauga art scene?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently the Youth Poet Laureate of the city of Mississauga, and I'm coming towards the end of a 2-year term. And what that means is that we have some official responsibilities with the city. And so we read at City Hall during our inauguration. I recently did a reading for Remembrance Day, and we're also involved with things like running events for National Poetry Month. But besides that, a lot of the role is also kind of self-led and whatever kind of work that you feel that you want to do in the community. So for me, that's been organizing open mics. It's been visiting high schools around the city, and currently also running a little poetry contest online. So that's some of the stuff that I've been up to over the past couple of years.
That's very good. Very nice. So for those of you who don't know, Lisa and I actually met about 2 years ago when I joined Sauga Poetry, which was a monthly open mic initiative organized by her, two previous poet laureates of the city, Paul Edward Costa and Karat Dar, and the prolific poet Tahira Rajwani. So I know a lot of Mississauga residents, myself included, found those meetings to be a real touchstone for the city's scattered literary community. So as far as duties as your Youth Poet Laureate goes, you knocked it out of the park with that one. So could you give us some insight to that kind of community program running, both the difficulties that you had to overcome and the rewards you felt while you were doing it?
Yeah, definitely. I think running a poetry open mic series is a super rewarding experience. And for me, the best part of it was, like you said, being able to connect with other poets in the Mississauga scene, because that wasn't something that I had really felt before, that there was like a Mississauga poetry community. And so it was really rewarding to be able to build that. And kind of on that note, also being able to see people who maybe started spoken word because of our series, and definitely people who were like, oh, this is like my first time ever reading my poetry out loud. So it's really like special to be able to create that opportunity for people. And yeah, like you said, it is also a lot of work, especially to put on a monthly series. You're always thinking about like the next event before the current one has even ended. And so definitely a lot of heart going into it there. And we're actually in the process of transitioning leadership a bit. And so I would say keep an eye out for potentially some events later this year if things go well.
Okay, I am very excited to hear that. All right, so another one of your duties as the Youth Poet Laureate has been to connect with the youth of the city and educate and encourage them on literature and the arts, as well as advocating for the importance of arts for the future generations of the community. So to ask an age-old question that it seems like everybody is asking these days, are the kids all right? What, what I'm very proud of that. What have your experiences been like with Mississauga's youth in this community? Have you noticed the current cultural and technological zeitgeist influencing them in a way that was different from when you were their age?
Are the kids all right? I think the kids are great. I think the kids
good to
are
hear.
amazing. No, I genuinely feel so much like inspiration when I interact with our youth. I think Mississauga's youth are incredibly talented. And like I mentioned before, I've been able to go into several high schools over the course of my term. Shout out to the League of Canadian Poets for helping to make that happen. But yeah, every time I work with youth, like high school students, like I'm so blown away by the quality of their writing, like genuinely their creativity. And their ability to write a poem in 5 minutes is shocking. Like, to answer your question of, is there anything that you think is different about the youth? I feel like they're just quick, like they're so fast.
Nice.
I'm like, do you guys want 5 or 10 minutes? And they're like 5, and that's all they need because they can write a whole poem in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And yeah, so I'm very inspired by our youth, and with the upcoming application for the Youth Poet Laureate, like I don't think there is any shortage of people who should apply. So
Okay, that's very good. Very happy to hear that. You've now made me excited for the next generation of the arts in the city. So As you just mentioned, the application deadline for the 2025 to 27 Youth Poet Laureate of Mississauga is coming up very soon on March 9th. And I imagine a good chunk of our listeners are aspirational applicants. So I'm curious to hear about your experience in this position. Going back in time to early 2023, could you describe to me how you felt when you first applied? Did you feel confident in your abilities? Did it feel more like a leap of faith? And if you can remember, could you describe what that moment was like when you first found out that you would be the fourth Youth Poet Laureate of Mississauga?
Yeah, so I was actually in Baltimore when I first found out the news. I was coming back. I was in the airport, and I was coming back from my first ever major poetry tournament, which was the Women of the World Poetry Slam back in 2023. And yeah, I was definitely in a very different place in my career at the time. I was very new to poetry, especially the in-person aspect of poetry, because I started doing spoken word during COVID. And so the first 2 to 3 years of everything I was doing was online. And so I'd only really been doing slam in person for like a few months. And yeah, like was just so in love with this art form and so inspired. I wanted to do everything. And so, yeah, that was like how I felt going into the position. I was just definitely intimidated for sure, but also excited and just I did feel ready to step into it.
Okay, very nice. Do you have any aspirations for a new step forward after this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we'll get there maybe with some of the later questions, but right now I'm trying to figure out what the next step is in terms of, balancing career and writing and the arts and
Mm.
grad school. And so that's kind of what's been on my mind recently.
Okay. All right. A very topical conversation that I am happy to get into later down the line. And while we're reminiscing, let's roll the clock even further back to late 2019, early 2020, when you were first starting to take poetry more seriously. I was quite surprised to find out in my research that you were in your third year of your Bachelor of Science program at McMaster University when you started really taking part in the spoken word scene. And I'm very curious about how these two sides, your scientific studies and your artistic spirit, contrasted, perhaps even battled with one another at the time. Choosing to be an artist instead of a scientist, especially in our current economic climate, has a lot of baggage attached to it. So, what was it like for you to make those series of decisions to dedicate yourself truly to your art form?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. But for me personally, I have never thought of it as choosing between being an artist versus being a scientist. So kind of how it went down for me was that when I graduated in the spring of 2022, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do next in terms of grad school. And I also wanted to take some time off just for myself. And so I was like, okay, like I'm gonna take a year off. And then in the fall of like that same year, 2022, I did a residency that was like 3 weeks long in the redwood forests of Northern California,
Mm.
where I basically like lived in the woods in like our own little cabins with 5 other artists. And it was just a very beautiful and grounding experience. And it made me realize, one, that I wanted to slow down, but also that I just wanted to fully try like doing arts full time for a while. And then flash forward to about half a year later, I also found out that I was selected as the Youth Poet Laureate. So that kind of gave a nice timeline on it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep doing arts full time until the end of my term. And that's kind of where we are now. We're coming up on the end of my term. And so now I'm in the process of deciding what's next, kind of like what the next big change is gonna be.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't pieced together that all of those events had happened so close to one another. Does it
Yeah.
feel at any point like you kind of fell into it, or has this all felt very intentional?
No, it has felt very intentional.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that's a good thing.
All right, very good. So speaking of your residency at the Creekside Arts in California, your first chapbook, which I have a copy of here, A Story Ending in Redwoods, came out a couple of months ago in November. It was first published by Anstruther Press and actually sponsored by the Mississauga Arts Council's microgrant program. So could you give us some more insight on your experience of professionally publishing a poetry collection?
Yes, and
Because we got magic
I'm a
copies.
miss. Yeah, I got my copy right over here too. I just had to pull that out. Would you like me to explain what a chapbook is?
Absolutely. I've never heard this word before.
Yeah, so a poetry chapbook is a short collection of poetry. A standard poetry collection is usually around 70, 80 plus pages. But a chapbook usually runs anywhere 15 to maybe 30. That's kind of a longer one. And they kind of started out as just something that poets would, print out at their houses and like staple together, maybe like give to friends or like sell at shows. But over the years, they've kind of developed into their own genre, and they're also a really good stepping stone to a full length collection. And so for me, like I had been thinking about putting together a chapbook for like a long time, like probably over a year already. But I was just very intimidated and honestly didn't feel like I could do it. I think similar to you, like I come from the more spoken word aspect of poetry and like that performance background. And so I just didn't really have any experience with like publishing and just understanding how poetry elements work like on the page. But what happened was that in the spring of 2023, I reached out to this poet called Manahil Bandukwala because I read this book of hers, Monument, and it just blew me away. And I really fell in love with her work. I reached out to her and I was like, hey, like I kind of want to put together a chapbook collection. There's this grant from the Mississauga Arts Council. I'm thinking about applying for it. Like, would you be up for me applying for you to be my editor on this chapbook? And she said yes. And I applied for that grant and was successful. And so that kind of started this like year and a half long process of putting this chapbook together because I'm extra, but also because it wasn't just putting the book together. It was also like mentorship. And so, Manahil we did sessions about like enjambment and form, talking about like how to curate a collection. And, we kind of found that in our brainstorming, the poems were probably going to center around like girlhood and gender-based violence because that was the focus of a lot of my earlier writing. Like eventually I just like put all my poems together in a document and I sent it over to her. And then we did like several editing sessions over a few months and it was done. And then the chapbook was published in November. And now she's out in the world and she's looking real cute. And it's been a very like different experience having a book out. And even little things like navigating the fact that you should like plug it. And also like just like being able to do like quote signings after shows or just like like selling the chapbook after shows is like very very fun. So yeah, very very grateful for the Mississauga Arts Council and like that whole experience.
It's very good. I'm also curious about the cover. I
Yes.
hadn't really noticed it and like stopped to think about it until I was looking at it right now. But the one lip, I don't know how if people can see that, the one lip covered in what is that, chocolate drippings?
Wow, that's blood, but
Oh,
no,
I
it's so fun.
I interpreted this totally wrong.
That's so fine because I think if you think it's chocolate, like that actually low key that works as well with the themes of the book. So
Mhm.
that's not a bad interpretation at all.
Wow, blood that looks like chocolate. That's nice. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So you actually took some significant time off in 2024. Given how much you accomplished in just the last 5 years, I can totally see why. I mean, right after you leave your hiatus, you're on stage accepting the Lillian Allen Emerging Artist Prize from the Ontario Arts Council. That is huge. Congratulations for that. So for this final question, I would like to focus on a really big conversation that's happening these days, especially amongst self-employed people, and that is self-care and work-life balance. So what is your relationship with these practices in your career? Have you ever struggled with them in the past? And how are you navigating them now as a self-employed freelance artist?
Yeah, this is a question that is really important to me and It's honestly the thing that I think about most nowadays when it comes to writing. And my relationship with writing has changed a lot over the course of my laureate term. When I first started, I was so excited and I was really so in love with spoken word, and I wanted to do everything possible. And I think now I'm more intentional about the opportunities that I say yes to, and I'm also more intentional about how I write and where I choose to share my writing.
Okay. And when you say being intentional about what you write, and where you share your writing, can you elaborate a little bit more on what that means?
Yeah, I think I've been trying to write more for myself. Um, and I think in the past, whenever I had a piece of writing that I was very excited about, I felt like I should immediately share that. And I also didn't always put a lot of thought into what I'm going to share, at an open mic versus like what I'm going to share at a slam. And now I feel like there are certain poems that I would never do in a poetry slam, which if you don't know is like a competitive poetry event where you're scored on your piece. And even some poems that I wouldn't read at an open mic, or that maybe I wouldn't read at an open mic in Mississauga, but I would at one that was maybe a little bit more far away from home. Um, and I think it's important to be able to write for yourself, and also to even have some poems where you're like, I'm not going to share this. Like, this is a beautiful poem. Like, I'm so proud of it, but I'm going to keep it just for myself. So I've been doing a lot more of that in the past, like several months, and I think it's been a really positive experience. So yeah, definitely still, exploring that relationship with like writing and work-life balance, but it's kind of where I'm at right now.
Wow. Is very beautiful. Like very, it sounds very self-honoring, in a way, and giving yourself the respect of privacy, of not sharing yourself with everybody, which I think is really important for artists, especially poets, for an art form that is so, I guess, has such it attracts a lot of people that have, they feel like they are compelled to just put themselves on a page and serve it up to
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
there's something very powerful and very exemplary of self-love, that you are willing to write stuff that's beautiful and just keep it as a gift to yourself. So as much as I would really love to keep chatting with you today, Lisa, we do have to wrap this up pretty soon. But is there anything you would like to plug before we head out?
Yes, I would like to plug two things. The first is that I think this episode is coming out not too long from now, and so I think it is timely to plug that we are running poetry events every single Thursday in April for National Poetry Month. And so the
Okay.
first event that's happening is going to be a poetry performance workshop led by myself as well as your poet laureate Andrea Josic. That's going to be on Thursday, April 3rd. Thursday after that is going to be a paint and poetry event led by myself. Um, After that, Andrea is going to be doing a poetry and nature event. And then finally, at the end of the month on Thursday, April 24th, we have the Mississauga Poetry Slam. And depending on when this podcast comes out, the call for performers might be open. And so definitely go look that up on Sauga Culture, or give them a follow regardless. And yeah, come out to an event. We would love to see you. That's the first thing I wanted to plug. And the second thing I wanted to plug is myself. Yeah, like my chapbook, A Story Ending in Redwoods, is out. And my screen is okay, it's adjusting now, so you can see
Yeah.
it. So yeah, if you want to check out that chapbook or any of my other work, whether it be like my published work or some of my videos, you can go to my website, lisashen.ca. That's Shen with an S, not a C. And you can also find me on Instagram. If you look at my full name, again, it's Lisa Shen. And yeah, thank you so much, India, for having me. And this is like a really cool initiative, and I'm really honored that I get to be the first guest. And wishing you, the best of luck with the rest of the episodes.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. And just for anybody, because they can only see this, this is really good quality paper. Like, I don't know what you printed this on. It feels like cardstock. This is really nice to hold. So I
Yeah.
encourage everybody, go get that a copy in person at one of your readings, perhaps. and available on the website lisashen.ca. Thank you very much, Lisa, for joining us today, and thank you to everybody for listening. This has been India Brown at the Sauga Arts Hub, and we will see you next time.